Q&A. Just a reminder that we love questions from the audience, so you can start commenting your questions now, or you can also add them as we go. I'll be right back on to welcome our guests to the show. Thanks for meeting us for coffee.
Sometimes coordinating multiple loads, clients, emails, and accounts becomes confusing and tedious. Introducing TIE TMS, the first all-in-one tool that helps you optimize your freight broker processes. You can send and receive quotes, review the shipment status, and keep control of your invoices all from one single screen. It's easy to manage and utilizes the best integrations. Don't take our word for it, our customers are raving about TIE. With TIE, you can improve your productivity by 75%. Go to tiesoftware.com and get a free demo now.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. If you remember last week, I said I have a lot of housekeeping things to take care of at the beginning of this because we have so many conferences. Well, we added another one. So now I have even more to run through real quick. But to help you guys save some dollars real quickly, there are links already in the comments of this show on LinkedIn. We have $200 off your registration at DatCon added to that now. If you use promo code Coffee200, we can also save you guys $200 right now to JOC Inland Distribution, which is coming up. There is a discount code for that as well that you guys can apply when you go to check out. And then we have a registration that will save you a couple $100 for Manifest, which is in February. And I'm missing one, Trimble Insight. How could I forget? That's the nearest one. It is coming up. We are actually running out of time to register because it is just a few weeks away. So I will be in Las Vegas at the Venetian for that. So will the Meet Me for Coffee podcast. We will be having an open mic, again, challenging anyone who hears this, who is going to JOC Inland or to Trimble Insight to reach out to us and let us know how that you would be interested. And we will let you know how to come get on a brief recording segment of the Meet Me for Coffee podcast. So look forward to seeing everyone there. I would love to welcome on my guest now and let him introduce himself. I have with me today Mr. Matt, who is the Chief Economist at Breakthrough. Matt, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you, Samantha. It's a pleasure to be on this morning.
Absolutely. Would you please introduce yourself and just kind of let us know a little bit more about who you are, what you do, but also maybe what you did before this, and just kind of let us know your journey in this industry.
Sure, happy to do so. My name is Matt Muenster, so not pronounced like the cheese. It's crazy German last name. I'm
Yep.
Chief Economist at Breakthrough. I just celebrated my 10th work anniversary with the company, so I've had the pleasure of seeing it grow from being a transportation energy management, solely focused transportation energy management company into more diverse products across transportation energy, the freight market, and sustainability. I'm personally adding value into the business by leading a team of researchers and economists as part of my responsibility as a chief economist. Also offer subject matter expertise to our clients on a routine basis. As a team, we pull together a number of publications across transportation energy markets globally, especially here with the US, Canada, Mexico, but also Europe is a focal point of interest. We have a now quarterly sustainability advisor in which we're discussing the latest developments related to alternative energy and the policy environment, which we know these days is certainly swirling with activity. And we pay really close attention to broader freight markets. We have a freight advisor, a monthly publication that offers our insights and forecasts to clients. And it's across all these publications, webinars that we do, one-to-one engagements and meetings that really focused on providing insights to shippers. When I say that, we want to provide strategies that are resilient, adaptable, and ultimately offer our clients a greater sense of predictability than before they engage with us at Breakthrough, and specifically our team. I've had a number of roles in the company, beginning with being an analyst on what was then called the decision support team, which I like to tell people it's like the red button, you push it, it says easy on it, and hopefully I can do some analysis and get you an answer, all the way through my role now as chief economist. Prior to working at Breakthrough, I worked in healthcare, actually. I can say I do enjoy transportation supply chains more than healthcare. I love the team I work with, but this, as an economist, certainly trips my trigger that much more. And as far as educational background, I have an undergraduate degree from St. Norbert College in De Pere, which is close to Green Bay, where Breakthrough is headquartered. I also have a master's degree in economics from Bowling Green State in Ohio. I'm a father of two, so that takes my time up away from the office. I have a soon-to-be 6-year-old daughter. I've been rounding her age up to 6 for quite some time now, but soon-to-be 6, and an 8-year-old son. So I love to just stay busy with their activities, and we love to be outdoors, camp, and just have good times on adventures, as we call them, together.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for introducing yourself. My son turned 6 for real on last Monday. We were on a family vacation in Colorado, so I've been doing the same thing. I'm like, yeah, he's basically 6. Well, now he's actually 6. So right there with you. I understand that energy level for sure too. So well, thank you for letting us know more about your background and what it is that you're currently doing. I'm really looking forward to this. Obviously, a little bit different angle. I have had, I don't know, probably at least half a dozen economists on this show over the last year. But every economist that I've had on kind of has a different area, main focal point that they're working to evaluate. And so you being so heavily involved in the diesel markets, alternative energy, sustainability, and more global economy than some of the domestic economists I've had on is also really interesting to me. So let's cover a little bit of domestic stuff first, and to get that out of the way, because I know we were talking before the show, and you guys recently had your Breakthrough conference, and you guys had people out, and something that seemed to be a pretty common theme is people who are in attendance wanting to know Breakthrough's take on when the market's going to change here in the domestic freight market, which is something we talk about quite a bit on this show. But let's just I'd love to get your thoughts quickly at a high level, what you think is going on now, when you foresee any changes, and then I'm going to ask you some more cool questions about some other things too.
Sure. That's a perfect place to start. As Samantha talked about, we just came off of our annual conference, which is called the Mercury Group. We held it in Nashville this year with a focus upon the next era of transportation. Although I'd say we're also keenly focused on the very near term of that next era of transportation, and often are asking the question of when will the market turn. I think when that question is asked, It's asking a couple of things. One, we want to know when there's going to be greater freight demand, because we've seen the tonnage decrease in trucking in the United States. We've seen total shipments decrease. It's something we track at Breakthrough. We have about $28 billion of freight spend running through our systems. We're able to assess it on a sector by sector basis and see how shipments are standing up in the broader market. And so we've been really heading into a trough and experiencing a trough in terms of freight demand for the better part of 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
When we think about what's next for transportation and when this will turn, we have to think about it in a couple of ways. So first, I mentioned we've seen from our data more broadly, macro and publicly available data, that we've been in a trough. We've been in a slump in terms of the demand and things moving for the freight market. So we see that both in terms of total freight as well as the rate environment. And we can look across carriers in our network, whether they're asset-based, non-asset, whether they're the largest carrier in the market, smallest broker in the market. We know that their rates have been generally flat and bumping around on the bottom on that trough for over a year, kind of regardless of how that freight's classified. So we have that. We know we're in the trough. So we're expecting that turn. Well, what can bring us out of this? We think it's a couple of things. First, and kind of gratefully, we've had very resilient consumers despite high inflation. Something that's helped that along is that over the course of the last calendar year, real wages have grown. So when we think about wages and account for inflation, we're still seeing growth, even though we've had relatively high inflation rate. So that's helped a resilient consumer out. And now we're approaching a point of inflection in terms of the tightness of monetary policy. And very broadly in the market, we're expecting rate cuts to start in September. So we need to see a couple things. We need to continue to see that consumer remain very resilient. We do need to see loosening monetary policy to offer more relief. And ultimately, if these dynamics can continue, we can achieve that soft landing. And ultimately, then we'll see that turn in the freight market. Because we know from our analysis of data science teammates, it's really got to be demand to turn it. It's not just going to happen from capacity. So in speaking about rates, but we expect both freight demand and ultimately the rate environment to begin changing over the course of the next 3 quarters. When we think about where our freight demand or the total level of shipments that we experience across about more than 150 Fortune 500 companies will be over the next 12 months. Right now, the magic number is between 2 and 3% growth in terms of that level of shipments. And so we are projecting from strength of the consumer, other broad economic indicators that benefit from that we do see this market turn. And that's my overall summary of where we're seeing the what's in store for the freight market in the near term.
I want to ask a hypothetical what if real quickly. Like, what if the consumer is tapped? Like, let's say they have no more left to give, because we've been giving at a pretty steady pace. Some people estimate we've been giving a little over what people should be given, even given their wage gains. So let's say interest rates come down, but it doesn't actually like really prompt a consumer spending. Will there still be enough movement, I would say, just through like maybe the housing markets or construction markets or something else to still kind of create that demand stimulus if we see interest rates start to be cut? And then I think my other question too, which I don't know that I've ever asked this, kind of getting a little ahead of myself maybe, how interest rates were very, very low, like during post-pandemic. Like I bought my house at a 2.5, I think, which is unreal. What are we talking about, like, cutting back to? That's what I don't quite understand. And is it going to be like enough to really excite people to spend again like we have spent? And I think the only reason I ask that is because I think a lot of the capacity and even brokerages that are in the marketplace were pandemic born brokerages and carriers, and then we're all waiting to get back to that. But will we ever get back to that? I think is what I'm saying. So let's just do this like what if scenario where the interest rates start to come down, but we maybe don't see like the demand stimulus that we would expect, or is that just not possible? Like we're going to see the demand.
Yeah, excellent question. Let me add some context. So even though rates may begin to be cut in September, I think they will. I don't expect it to translate immediately into demand.
Right.
That's when talking about the next 12 months in our freight demand forecast, much of that demand growth is backloaded. So pushing into the center of, or middle of 2025, I should say.
Right.
So that's part of it. For a consumer to be resilient, we need to maintain real wage growth, inflation-adjusted wage growth at a pace that we have that needs to remain positive so that they have that spending power. We've seen real consumption expenditures make their way gradually back toward a pre-pandemic trend. So these trends need to hold up, to your point. And we don't expect, we just had pretty lousy numbers on housing starts in the month of July, 15% below year over year levels.
Yep.
That needs to begin to improve. The rates need to do that, but we'll need several cuts, not just a cut in September. We need more aggressive loosening of monetary policy, if you will, to get to where we need to be and offer that kind of support to freight demand come 2025.
Yeah. I think 2024 was just such a bummer year for everybody. Was expecting something different. I don't think that's happening. Thank you for that. Now, I have to ask another question that is something I don't spend a lot of time thinking about, admittedly. I did when I was actively in brokerage every day and doing pricing and working with clients who were working with breakthrough and other things. But can you just kind of summarize at a high level what's happened in the diesel fuel markets in the last couple of years and where are we at right now? And then what, if any, potential does diesel have to improve or disrupt the market in the next, say, 12 months?
Okay. Great questions. Let me start with the historic backward-looking one. So explain what's gone on with the diesel market in the last 2 years. And you can, if you go back to 2022 to describe it, you can basically describe it as pandemonium. So we had an energy crisis. Diesel was among the hardest hit commodities, probably making an argument it's between diesel and natural gas following Russia's invasion of Ukraine. But from 2022 through 2023, we were experiencing an intraday, so same day, diesel market commodity move of 10 cents about once a week. In the previous decade, from 2010 to 2019, we had experienced that perhaps once a year. So it was volatility like we'd never seen before. It was difficult for a lot of firms to manage. It made reimbursement of the actual price in the market and the day that the price is present very important because retail environments were lagging so much they couldn't keep up with the market volatility. So that was the last 2 year experience. Bringing the question more up to the present day, we've seen a normalization of the diesel market. When we think about what matters to diesel prices, it's comprised of a few key points. And I'm going to use some generalizations here. It fluctuates over time. But just as a general rule, we think of crude oil prices supporting about 50% or so of that final diesel cost. The diesel commodity crack, or the additional premium onto diesel as a unique transportation product, adds about 25% to its final cost. Taxes, which we all love, are about 15%. And then finally, that last 10% of the cost buildup is really the transportation and distribution cost of the fuel. So what we had experienced in 2022 and 2023, where we had a run up in not only crude oil prices, saw them go north of $120 a barrel, I believe, going back to May and June of 2022. But the diesel crack, or the refining premium, just shot off. In and of itself, it would have largely represented the cost of a barrel of oil. So like double that typical commodity price. That's all calmed down. We're back to, largely speaking, diesel cracks or premiums that are more in line with the 2016 to 2019 market. They're a bit elevated from that yet. We've really had the normalization occur in the market, and that's really where we are today. We're sitting with wholesale diesel prices between about $3.10 and $3.20 per gallon, the retail price being about 55 cents above that. And we're into a much steadier market. There's still volatility. There's a lot going on in the world that jars it on a weekly basis, but we have had a normalization in the market.
Okay, excellent. So as we're talking about normalization in the market, and we've been experiencing that, what is that kind of forward-looking piece? I mean, I won't pretend to be an expert on oil by any means. I don't know actually a whole lot about it, but I do know that a lot of it comes from the Middle East, that they produce a large amount of the world's oil. And we've just been experiencing, and we also knew, obviously, because of like Russia, Ukraine. So some of it was coming from there. So we had some disruption caused by Russia's invasion of Ukraine. But now there's quite a lot going on in the Middle East as well, with geopolitical conflicts and wars. So what do these things interrupt our access to oil or our trades? And then even if they're not right now, what I'm sure there are people trying to gauge and measure the potential for these disruptions to escalate.
Yeah, excellent point. There is that mix of geopolitics and global oil market matters tremendously. One question we asked participants at the Mercury Group, our shipper guests, room of about 200 or so of them, is how many of you expect to see that cost per barrel of crude oil exceed $100 over the course of the next 2 years, largely talking that it would be influenced by geopolitical risk. And there are plenty of hands raised, and rightfully so. There's a lot going on in terms of conflict in the world right now. And to your point about the players that matter, if we think about the largest producers, we probably qualify them as the United States, Russia, and Saudi Arabia, or the United States, Russia, and the broader Middle East, or OPEC. OPEC accounts for the Organization for Petroleum Exporting Countries, accounts for more than 40% of production hitting the global market. So anytime there's disruption with one or multiple of those key producers in the market, and here we are discussing multiple in conflicts right now, with the war in Ukraine and Russia being involved, and the Middle East more broadly being involved in conflict right now, there's that risk. And so risk is elevated. Something that's weathered it to date is U.S. oil production. So we're bumping up against our all-time highs, just shy of, I believe, 13.5 million barrels of oil per day. And we've shown that we have some elasticity in terms of ramping up that supply in smaller price movements. So it doesn't have to increase too much further from the $75 to $80 per barrel range that's in today to support U.S. production growth. And what we're also experiencing has been a pretty synchronized downturn in global economies. We've had tight monetary policy. So key economies like China has been off of its GDP trend. The broader Eurozone has largely been off of its GDP trend. And so international demand for oil has been relatively weak in 2024. And that's something that's helped balance this equation, that we don't have the demand that we did a year ago, or a couple of years ago, and supply can support the market, even though we have this litany of geopolitical risks that in a tighter market might see prices climb to $100 a barrel.
Okay. Yeah. No, that definitely makes sense with obviously a lot of weaker economies out there right now. I know Europe has been kind of struggling. China's been struggling. So just a lot of who are probably the demand generators for more of this oil are kind of in a lull right now with that. Okay. On the note of diesel fuels, I know that you talked about it in your introduction. We've kind of mentioned it briefly before this show. I want to say this was probably 2019 when I started really hearing a lot more about sustainability and ESG. And I was working with largely enterprise shippers. And so a lot of your larger corporations who we started putting these words out there a lot. My company at the time started releasing quarterly ESG reports. And I really felt like initially we felt like that was going somewhere, like things were going to start dramatically changing, requirements were going to start changing. And then I feel like we all just tried to survive like a few years of the pandemic. And maybe like people got tired of trying to do anything other than like what was just necessary. And so I feel like it kind of got, this is my opinion, but I feel like it kind of got shelved for a while. This whole sustainability thing and where are we really taking this? And I would say that I don't think sustainability as a whole has been shelved. I think that there's a lot of things that these corporations are doing to address sustainability, but a lot of things outside of actual like truck transportation or even intermodal transportation and things like that. So Now that we have been in this lower market cycle for a couple of years, I'd like to get your take on this. I'd like to circle back to, like, I haven't been working with shippers directly for almost, I think, a year and a half, 2 years. So I'd like to just kind of know what is going on. What are we hearing from these corporations when it comes to sustainability, specifically within the domestic freight markets? What are people thinking about, focused on, doing right now? And I'd just kind of like to get a pulse on that from you, if you can.
This is a great time for me to provide an update on Pulse fresh off our conference.
Yeah.
It was still a core theme and often a topic of conversations, whether formal in the content or informal happening around the room. I think that experience helps suggest that sustainability remains in focus, even at a time in 2024 when I think plenty of businesses are trying to rein in costs. Focus on perhaps even returning to profitability because of challenges out in the market. There's a lot to think about, and cost generally comes first. And that's the first topic of consideration. But I think what we're also learning is we're moving beyond the stage in which it has to be one or the other, that you can either remove costs or have sustainability. I think we're seeing plenty of instances, and we focus on actions in which both are achievable and also not sacrificing service levels, which I'll add some context to that in a moment. But shippers are always optimizing their network. They can realize sustainability progress towards their goals from that. I do want to add the overwhelming majority of our clients have sustainability commitments. Many of them are members of the Science-Based Targets Initiative, have their own relatively stringent goals. Some of their goals are more stringent than what we're seeing pushed out in the marketplace or internationally in policy in more progressive areas of the world, like Europe, for example. So it's a mix of things driving sustainability. It's their consumers. It can be their leadership. It can be shareholders. It can be policy. I say a lot of businesses, even if policy takes a back seat in some circumstances or is made less stringent, I'd expect them to continue to advance on their own corporate goals, which are relatively ambitious in many cases. I think something else we've seen shift is this mindset that it's got to be alternatives, or it's got to be intermodal that can help get you to your sustainability objectives. Yeah. It's really the whole toolkit. Thinking of alternative energy as a portfolio that can be used to your disposal to help decrease emissions in your network while also achieving savings, that it's got to be economically viable and scalable. We can use intermodal to reduce emissions on lanes and also do it on a cost competitive basis with truckload. And we can remove shipments. We can be smarter about the ways that we're maximizing our trailer space or removing empty miles in order to also meet our sustainability goals. So I think all of those things are factoring into answering this question, that momentum remains from the recent experience in conferences. I'd say that's something I gather from conversations. Even if cost is in focus, momentum for sustainability remains. And we're moving on to this conversation of not just solving for a network of electric trucks, but thinking about what tools are present in this portfolio of tools to help get to these stackable wins and decarbonize.
Yeah. Thank you. That's kind of what I was hoping to hear and going for, is that there's a lot more that we can talk about when we talk about sustainability than like electric vehicles and intermodal. I would say, like, what do you think what are some ideas for carriers, the actual, like, the asset fleets out there, or even brokerages to start considering when they're trying to partner with shippers who have sustainability initiatives? Like, what are some things that they should be considering doing, or if they're already doing it, making sure that they're like highlighting that and somehow presenting that when they're approaching these shippers? Like, what is it that these shippers are looking for in their partnerships when they're trying to focus on sustainability when it comes to their transportation?
Yeah, excellent question. At another recent engagement I gave market outlook at a Carrier Council event. It's super beneficial for me because I can have conversations. Like I said, our clients at Breakthrough are shippers. More and more, though, we're looking for partnerships in the industry. And so I had a lot of conversations with carriers. I think there's several actions that we can take in. First, be transparent with your own sustainability ambitions, and you can work with your shipper partners to align those goals and objectives. I think promote the efficiency of your technology. It's not just about offering alternative energy within your network. It's about the most efficient delivery of those goods, the lowest carbon footprint of delivering those goods in the marketplace. So, don't be bashful about boasting the efficiency you're able to achieve, and be transparent in what alternative energy you can consume in the marketplace when those requests for information come, because shippers are actively looking for partners who can continue to offer them great service, do it at a competitive rate, and ultimately help them decarbonize. And if they can hit those variables at the same time, obviously you're going to be a very attractive partner. So we are actively working on creating those partnerships and focusing on getting those relationships established that hold up all of those variables.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, I always try to think about, not just what are people looking for, but then like, how do we actually present ourselves? That's the sales side of me coming back. It's like, how do we make sure we're telling people in a productive way what we do and about things that they should care, they do care about? How do we make sure we present that? Okay, I have a couple questions that I want to ask. One of them's a little bit like I did earlier, more hypothetical. But the other one is, I think you already mentioned this, so let me just like circle back real quickly. We should be expecting rate cuts is kind of everyone's consensus here. What, like you kind of touched on this, but can you expand a little more? What do we expect? Let's say we get a rate cut in September and then it continues on. Does that have an immediate effect? How long will it take for it to have an effect if not? And what are we really talking about when we say a rate cut? Like what does that rate cut do that's actually going to maybe stimulate some type of activity in our markets?
Yeah, what we're talking about with the rate cut is largely reducing cost for capital in the market. And we need to see several rate cuts, and there'll be lagged effects for that to transpire and ultimately spur growth. So rates ultimately have a direct impact onto the consumer. When we're purchasing durable goods, we're purchasing houses, even our credit cards are impacting the rate at which we can borrow and the rate at which banks can lend and ultimately create economic activity. The higher the rates, the higher cost that comes with it. It's helpful when, like I mentioned before, real wages are continuing to grow so that some of this effect is mitigated by the fact that consumers are remaining resilient and can maintain their level of spending. But ultimately, we need rate cuts to support other industries, especially capital intensive, to decrease, create that motivation, lower costs for greater investments in the economy, and ultimately spur that next round of economic growth. The longer we have the elevated rates, the longer some of these projects are put in hold, the longer that ultimately that economic activity can sit on the sidelines, and we see that unemployment rate ramp up. The more that firms have uncertainty with their longer term investments. So we need, and I think the election has a hand in this too. Rates are one part of the uncertainty, but also the political environment adds uncertainty to the market. I do think corporations hold up some of their planning until they have cleaner line of sight to policy. So there's a couple of things I think in the near term can be relieved in some ways, regardless of election outcome, and ultimately seeing that rates will be cut can help boost confidence and create more activity.
Yeah. Here's my hypothetical. What happens to the U.S. economy if the world decides to go to war? And I don't know who is going to war with who necessarily, but like we already have one war going on. Well, we have a couple, really. We have ongoing war going on in the Middle East, it seems, constantly, even if we don't necessarily call it that all the time. And then we have Russia and Ukraine. But what happens if tensions continue to escalate and we do end up with some type of involvement in a global war?
Yeah, I don't mean to smile at the question. It's a serious question. It's been asked now for an extended period of time, especially with Russia's invasion of Ukraine. There are a few plausible fronts that could happen. I mean, there have been, just look at Foreign Affairs magazine, for example. I mean, the NATO-Russia conflict, the U.S.-China economic conflict gets talked about, and then you add the Middle East in the situation.
Yeah.
I think I'll reference the recent experience with Russia's invasion of Ukraine to support this answer. When conflict breaks out, there can be really tremendous supply side shocks. And I'd expect that would be the first major risk to come with a broader conflict. That there's an obvious shock to your labor market. In the case of Ukraine and Russia, that's true. Plenty of individuals now are involved with the conflict directly rather than at manufacturing sites, for example. There's a tremendous shock into the commodities that were present in participant of that conflict's market. So Ukraine, we know, was a significant grain exporter. That market was disrupted, as was they're a significant exporter of automotive components. That market was disrupted. It creates lags, creates shortages. Ultimately, it increases the price for consumers of those goods. And so that's an impact. Then Russia, we realized that there was a total international shuffle of energy supplies that amounted from that conflict. So I don't think it was nearly as brutal as some forecasts were expecting, and sanctions haven't been as successful as I think was originally intended. So not as much Russian product has been taken out of the market as what was intended, but still it took time for it to establish the supply chains and infrastructure to send its oil and natural gas to other markets, namely East, in places like China and India. And it created shortages across the Eurozone with the absence of those natural gas and refined product deliveries. And ultimately, the U.S. had to make up for the shortage on the other side of the Atlantic. So all of this transpired in a relatively short period of time and did have a tremendous impact on the cost of energy. Wholesale diesel prices were more than $5.50 per gallon in the month of June 2022. And so I think that's what I would expect from it. The unfortunate reality of really tremendous supply side shocks early on. It can turn into demand later. The U.S. is manufacturing arms to support the conflicts and government's interest in purchasing weapons internationally. So there are industries that benefit from that. When there's heightened geopolitical risk, we tend to invest a lot more and make more purchases for defense. And so that's happening. But I do think the biggest risk is the supply side.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I definitely think that even though a lot of the news coverage and conversation here around the Ukraine-Russia war has gone away, right? We still have some lasting effects of that when we're talking about like supply chains and certain resources that even if sourcing was already shifted somewhere else and we are getting it, that might be some of that like inflationary pressure still on certain components that we're needing or production. So
I should interject and just say, I don't necessarily consider myself a geopolitics expert. So just speaking to the econ part of things.
I don't think anybody anymore really feels confident in saying that they have the answers to geopolitics.
Geopolitics or policy. I have a perspective, but probably not enough expertise.
Well, we appreciate that perspective and thank you for taking a stab at it. I know I was definitely curious to ask that, and also trust that you know more than I do. So we are a little over time, so we're going to go ahead and wrap this one up. But Matt, if anybody has any other questions about anything that we talked about today or questions about Breakthrough or anything like that, how can they best contact you?
Yeah, please feel welcome to reach out to me via email. It's matt.muenster, just spelled like my name, @breakthroughfuel.com. And also, please on LinkedIn.
Yes, absolutely.
I'm happy to be a resource, try to be as objective as possible, really focus on leading with data and information, and ultimately helping provide resources that industry stakeholders can arrive to their own decisions. So yeah, it'd be my pleasure to be a resource if I can.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. If anybody who is listening back to this at a later time, you didn't catch the live show, you're listening on Apple, Spotify, or YouTube, if you do find the event on LinkedIn, go ahead and ask us questions still. Just tag either Matt or myself, and we're happy to try to jump back in the comment section and answer a couple questions if you had some, or send him an email or send it to him directly in a LinkedIn message. And hopefully you get some answers there. So thank you everyone so much for taking time this morning. Thank you, Matt, for being on the show. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure, Samantha. Thank you so much for the invite, and it's been a wonderful conversation.
Awesome. Thanks everyone for meeting us for coffee.